Last thing we need to talk about today before your test is the bony fish. So when we think about the bony fish, these are going to be the majority of the fish that you guys are already familiar with. If you like to eat seafood in the form of these vertebrate fish, it would be things like perch, salmon, cod, tuna. All of those would be examples of bony fish. I think I've told you derivatives before, but the class name is Osteichthyes. And so this comes from the bones that actually make up the skeleton. These are called osteocytes. So derivatives we talked about would be like osteoporosis, which is a disease of the bone, especially in humans as we age. So derivatives here relate directly to the fact that these all have a skeleton made entirely of bone, which is different than what we just saw for the cartilaginous fish like the sharks and rays. This is the largest class that we have in the entire vertebrate kingdom. So if we were to combine every single species of amphibian, reptile, bird, and mammal, all of those species numbers combined, there are still more bony fish than there are all of those other groups put together. So about 40% of all vertebrates are classified as bony fish. And when you look at the estimation numbers here, it is so drastically different from 15,000 to 40,000, just because if we're talking about ocean habitat, we have a lot of those areas that are largely undiscovered. So as we are looking at these different regions, we're able to add to that number. So that's why you see such a huge gap here between the two. When we're looking at the classification here, because we're talking about so many different species, it's hard to group them accordingly. And so that grouping relates normally to the type of fin that the animal has. So almost all of these bony fish with their skeleton made of bone is classified as a group called the ray-finned fishes. So these are, like I said, going to be the ones that you are most familiar with. The name, we are getting this from the fact that their fins actually have these thin rays or spines that are forming them. And so when we're looking at those rays or fins, this is why sometimes if you've been fishing, if you're a fisherman or woman, those fins can be very sharp. And so you have to be careful when you're getting the hook out of the mouth and things like that. So other types of bony fish do not have those thin spines that are helping to keep the fins stable and provide support. And so we talked about the functions of the different fin types, whether it's stability, whether it's momentum, whether it's steering. Ray-finned fish will always have these thin bones or spines called rays that are making up their fins. There are only 7 species. So think of that. We just said ray-finned fish, or bony fish rather, make up anywhere from 15,000 to 40,000 species in terms of their numbers. Only 7 of them are not classified as ray-finned fish. So when you look at a comparison here, that top picture is showing the bone structure in a typical ray-finned fish. You can see how there is a thin section of bone close to the body, and then those long spines that are forming the rays. Well, we're going to talk in a second about a group called lobe-finned fish. Look at the bone structure there. So as that fin extends from the body, then we have the bone structure moving further out into the actual fin itself. And so this is what we call a lobe-finned fish. They do not have those rays or spines that are extending out. The fins just tend to be not as rigid and more fluid in their movement compared to the ray-finned at the top. So when we look at the remaining 7 species, 6 of them are what we call lungfish. So these would be fish that, according to their name, are using that swim bladder as a modified lung. So they're kind of a transition group between the fish that we're talking about right now and our next animal group, which are the amphibians. Lungfish are only common in the waters off of Australia, Africa, and South America. And I have some images of the lungfish on the next slide. So this is very similar to how the mud skipper was being able to gulp in air and then stay out of water for a period of time. So this is what we said, the lungfish are using that swim bladder as a modified lung. And if there's a period of drought or anything like that, they'll actually burrow into the mud and go into a dormant state, kind of like a hibernation. The remaining species of the 7 is what we call a lobe-finned fish. So as I just showed you on that other diagram, there's only one living member that is remaining in that group, and it's called the coelacanth. So I'll get to that in a second. All of these are types of lungfish. And you can tell even from looking at their external appearance, they look very primitive. They almost look like they belong in some type of prehistoric period instead of modern day fish. So the lungfish are extremely unique because of those breathing mechanisms. Compare that to the lobe-finned fish. This is actually an interesting story because the coelacanth was once thought to be extinct. And so there's only one living member that is a part of that, and this is known as the coelacanth. So the only region where this is found is off the western coast of Africa. So I mentioned that we thought that this type of fish was extinct, and so a fisherman, I think it was in the 1940s, I think it's on the next slide, but the 1940s actually caught one off the coast of Madagascar, which is a little island nation off the coast of Africa. And so when we're looking at their populations now, they have gone from the east part where Madagascar is over on the western side of Africa. So pretty unique because, I was close, 1938. So scientists thought that they had gone extinct with the dinosaurs during the Triassic and Jurassic periods. And so now we use them as this major piece to this evolutionary puzzle. You know, if you think about that timeline we talked about, documenting fish over an extended period of time, this was a huge discovery. So you can imagine as a scientist that studies fish, thinking that this particular species was extinct and then all of a sudden realizing that there were still a few of them in the wild. So this on the left is a coelacanth in its natural environment. Population numbers still are not great, but they are noticing more of them in those different areas off the coast of Africa. This is one that was preserved and then put in, of course, in the Smithsonian or in a museum of some sort. But you can see its massive size. So this is the only living member of those lobe-finned fish. And you can even tell when you look closely, these fins are not as rigid. See how this is moving kind of back or laying backwards? Same as the one here. So if this were a ray-finned fish, this dorsal fin would be standing upright because of the spines that are found within those fins. We do not see that in the coelacanth. Fish are important for a lot of different reasons, and we've talked about a lot of these as we have discussed the fish over the past few weeks. If we're looking at food webs and food chains, if fish were taken out of those, even our own feeding relationships, there are a lot of cultures that use fish as a major source of food and income if we're talking economics here. They help to control populations of algae. We use them as recreation, and we even use them for relaxation. If you think of things like koi ponds, that's really common in Asian culture as well. We use them as a source of calm. When you would go into a dentist office or a doctor's office, even when I was a kid, almost every doctor's office had an aquarium in it because people were noticing that when you go to the doctor, a lot of people get really nervous or anxious because they feel like something is wrong. And so by having the aquarium in there, they were noticing that people's blood pressure was actually being lowered just by being in the office surrounded by the aquarium. Okay, so lots of different reasons, but I would say feeding relationships are going to be the most important. Bony fish, like I said, are the largest, so these are just a few more examples here. We have trumpet fish, we have angelfish, porcupine fish, eels. All of those would be grouped into those ray-finned bony fish. Looking more specifically at some of the lungfish, again, not common in our region, Africa, South America, and Australia. And these would be those lungfish. And then, of course, the lobe-finned fish would be the coelacanth. So I did kind of summarize that here just to make sure we're all on the same page. Almost all vertebrates are bony fish, and almost all of those bony fish are going to have the ray fins. There are only 7 species that are not. There are 6 species of the lungfish, and then the coelacanth is this lonely member of the lobe-finned fish. So if you do have any questions about the bony fish, feel free to stop by this afternoon or send me a message. Like I said, I will be at school today. It just won't be until a little bit later on in the day. So if you have questions, let me know. The rest of your time today, you need to be continuing to work on your fish review. We'll go over that together tomorrow, and your fish test is Wednesday.